Yes, Tyler is on from Future Peds Res, and he is going to be minding the chat for me, as well as collating some of the questions that you guys have if you haven't put them in the chat, and helping with some of the questions that you gave us before when you were registering for the talk. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and go. So there are lots of, I missed a slide. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, there's a lot of data available from the NRMP, and I encourage you to look it up yourself. If I can figure out how to unhide my slide, I will give you the URL, but you will all be intimately acquainted with that. So this is the NRMP. In addition to doing the match itself, also provides a lot of data about how it went. Some of that data we get quickly, some of that data takes a little bit longer for us to get, but it's all available. You don't have to log in, you don't have to be a member. So here's some data regarding the 2021 match. So this is not the match, obviously, that just happened. This is the one a year ago. And you can see that there were almost 3,000 spots in pediatrics, but almost 4,000 applicants in pediatrics, which led to, and in this circumstance and everywhere else where I'm talking about matching, the NRMP data it does not look at the people who went through the SOAP process. So when I give you statistics regarding matched residents, these are just people who found their programs through the match algorithm. It does not include people who did the SOAP process after, just so that you're aware of what that means. So in 2020, here are some numbers, and I'm going to break things down because I know that many of you are MD seniors or grads. Some of you are DO seniors and grads. Some of you are international seniors and grads. And so where I have separate information about each group, I'm going to try and break it out so that you have the best information for your situation. And then if I haven't answered a question about your specific situation at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. And Tyler put it in the chat earlier. We're recording this portion of the talk, but when we get to the Q&A portion, we're going to turn off the recording because I want people to really feel like you can ask whatever question you have without feeling awkward or like anyone who's ever going to care about the question knows that you asked the question. I'm not saying that well, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so here are some stats for MD seniors from 2020. And this is a number, so ROL is rank order list. So there are all of these different charts, which when I gave a talk like this to the fourth years in my program, I actually used the chart. And then when I was reviewing some of my slides going into this, very clearly on each chart, it says you don't have permission to do this without the written permission of the NRMP, and I don't have the written permission of the NRMP. So the charts are really lovely and pretty easy to read. So they looked at the number of how many places did people need to rank in order to match. And the answer is that after about 10 for MD seniors, everyone matched. So whether you had ranked 10 places or ranked 20 places, everybody matched. The mean step score for the matched seniors was 228. Unmatched was 215. So there's a difference there, obviously. Everyone with a step 1 score of greater than 241 matched. But the biggest increase in matches, when you're looking just at step scores, was for people who had a step score of greater than 220. And I know there's a lot of angst right now around the fact that that step 1 has gone to pass fail, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a bit. For step 2, the mean step 2 match score was 245, and the mean unmatched score was 232. And again, there was a point at which the greatest increase in matches happened for people who had step 2 scores of greater than 240. Looking at the DO seniors, same kind of data. Everyone with a rank order list of greater than 8 matched. The mean COMLEX level 1 that matched was a 523, unmatched was 442, and everyone with COMLEX 1 of greater than 551 matched. Similarly for COMLEX 2, matched was 562, unmatched was 474, and everyone who got a score of greater than 600 matched. A lot of DOs also take the steps, and the mean step 1 matched was 223, unmatched was 199, and step 2 CK was 237 with unmatched of 229. And I'm giving you a lot of data because of numeric data, because that is a lot of how the NRMP reports stuff. And then as I go on, I'm going to give you some more qualitative things. So I don't want you to walk away from this thinking that you're just a number, because that doesn't feel very good. Looking at international medical grads, they make distinctions between international medical graduates who are US citizens and international medical graduates who are not. And so I've delineated those as well. The mean step 1 matching score was 222, unmatched was 209. And the biggest jump there was for people who had a step 1 score of greater than 231. And then for folks for step 2 scores, matched was 234, unmatched was 222. And again, there was a big jump in number of matches greater than 240 if you got a step 2 score of greater than 241. And then for non-US, so again, these are international medical grads who are not US citizens. They are matched step 1 is 229, and the biggest jump was greater than 240, and matched step 2 CK was 237, and the biggest jump was at 251. So that's a lot of numbers. So there's also, and I neglected to, on my disclosure slide, there was a beautiful creature. I can't get back there, otherwise I'll lose my way. And that was a javelina. Happy to discuss javelina at length. This beautiful creature here is a Gila monster. And they are venomous and about that long. And you see them here in Tucson, just walking down the road like they own the place. So they talked to program directors, and mind you, this isn't every program director, it's the program directors who answered the survey. And if you remember that I mentioned that there were about 222 programs, this program director survey, they only got a response rate of about between 1/4 and 1/2. So obviously there are lots of programs that didn't respond. So you can take this data with that in mind. And they asked them about how did they decide who to interview. And they had different things that they looked at for different groups of people. So again, looking at US MD seniors, when they're considering their step 1 scores, about 50% of the programs only required that you pass. They didn't have like a firm cutoff of a specific score that you had to have in order to get an interview. About 13% had a preferred target, but it wasn't required, and about 36% had a required target. For step 2, 27% required pass only, 39% had a preferred target, and 30% had a required target. And so what that means, if you imagine the number of applicants that a particular program sees. So to tell you, here in Tucson, we start out with about between 1,300 and 1,500 applications. And so every program has a different way of figuring out how to narrow their funnel, how to go from 1,300, 1,500 applications down to some smaller number that you can invite for interviews. And so some programs will have a specific step target that may be the thing that they use to start to whittle that down. Other programs may have a more holistic review, or may have other specific benchmarks that they're looking at when they're trying to decide who to interview. So if you remember these numbers, just to when we're talking about IMG applicants, 32% of the program directors said you just had to pass step 1, and 53% had a required target. So that, you know, when we're looking at US graduates and IMG graduates, those numbers flipped. So many more programs did use a firm cutoff for IMG applicants. And the same thing is true here for the step 2 requirements when they're looking at who to interview. And then for DO students, and some programs, and I'll mention this a little bit later as well, some programs are happy to use your COMLEX scores, and some programs will only look at you if you have a USMLE step score. So these are sort of the breakdown of how they decide who to interview based on step scores for DO seniors. And then here are the COMLEX scores. So, you know, 40% required to pass, 40% required target, and then in between, and about the same for COMLEX, to a little bit lower numbers, but the same ratio of people who have required, all you have to do is pass, and compared to a required target. So again, I don't want you to think that programs have whittled you down to just a number. So when programs are deciding who to interview, they are looking at a huge range of different items. The way that the program director survey has broken down is it's broken down into education and academics, and it's broken down into personal characteristics and other knowledge about the applicant. And again, the descriptions that I'm giving here, there are expansive charts available on NRMP regarding this if you want to go back and look at the data. So when they looked at education and academics, when they asked, of these topics, which are important, these were the top 10 most important things to the programs. And the ones that are highlighted, when they were given the list of things and said, okay, I understand that they're all important, which ones are the most important? MSPE letters, and whether there were failed attempts at either COMLEX or USMLE were things that really stood out as influencing programs' decisions about whether to interview. The other category, the personal characteristics and other knowledge, here's again of the top 10 list, and the ones that are highlighted are ones that the program said were particularly important. Yes, we consider them all, because one of them is sort of a which do you consider? Check, 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 check. And then this is which things are most important. So things that are most important are diversity characteristics, overcoming significant obstacles, leadership experience, personal prior knowledge, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and perceived interest in the program. And some flags in this area, for some programs, if a student is going to require a visa is a red flag. And then the NRMP keeps track of people who violate the rules of match. And so if you have a flag for an NRMP match violation, that was actually the number one thing of these characteristics that people paid the most attention to. Because for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is it speaks to your professionalism, it speaks to your ethical behavior, and that's an area that a lot of people feel like is really hard to teach. And so programs are in the position of making choices about who they interview, and so those are things that potentially will keep you out of the interview chair. So once they've decided to interview, Then the question is, how do programs decide who to rank? And looking at those same categories again, the things that people find important, that programs find important, change. So within the education and academics, the MSPE is still super important. And then USMLE scores and COMLEX scores, both how well you do and whether or not you had any failed attempts, are important in this domain. Looking at the other domain, the answers are super different compared to the how to decide who to interview. Interactions with faculty, people's interpersonal skills during the interview process, and interaction with and feedback from residents were the three things that were the most important. Once you have interviewed, determining who to rank. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those things in a minute from my own opinion and experience. So here are some general tips that the NRMP gives to people. And I think that they're solid. So rank all of the programs you really want, regardless of your guess as to whether or not you're going to get in. So if you interview some, obviously you shouldn't rank any place. In fact, I don't even think you can rank a place that you didn't interview. But rank the places that you would be willing to go. Include a mix of highly competitive and less competitive programs within pediatrics, and really look at whether you would be willing to go, and then put them in order. So if you don't think about whether or not they would like I don't know, I don't think my interview went that well, I don't think they're going to rank me very highly. So what? Go ahead and rank them where you would rank them, and the details kind of come out in the algorithm. And make sure that you include all of the things about you in your application. And although I just spent the last 10 minutes telling you that USMLE scores are important and COMLEX scores are important, people match who do not have terrific USMLE and COMLEX scores. People match who do not have tons of publications or big research projects. So there is a lot of room for a lot of applicants to successfully match. So now I'm going to give you, full disclosure, my opinion of the situation. So letters of recommendation. When people talk about who should I get letters of recommendation from, do they matter? The answer is yes, they do matter. And the best letters, so I've been involved in intern selection for about a decade. And the best letters are written by people who know you well, people who have spent time with you clinically, and who can speak to your skills. And so in order to do that, it's helpful to give your letter writers supplemental information. So they may, you could give them your CV, you can give them your personal statement, give them as much information as they can so that they can write a letter that really reflects you. Because it's very easy to tell I don't really know this person, but they asked me to write a letter. And I have written those letters. I will write a letter for anyone who asks me to, but it is much harder to write a compelling letter for someone with whom I have not worked often. So I have suggested to people, I've said, I will always write you a letter, but you should consider getting a letter from someone who knows you better, or from someone who I only worked with you for 2 days on service. This other person worked with you for a week or worked with you for 2 weeks. That would be a better choice. And particularly for international students, your letters of recommendation really matter. So, and it's fair game to tell your letter writers that, because, and this was a piece of advice that I got from a colleague, but her experience was that her letter writers were not as aware as she was about how important the letter was. And so she needed to sort of prompt them. It's more than just they were here and they did the work, but giving details and giving a real good flavor. oh, and I typoed, but make sure you have some peds people. Now, there are people who came out of the womb knowing that they wanted to do pediatrics, but there are a lot of people who didn't. And some people may not have decided that they wanted to go into pediatrics until closer to the end of your 3rd year. And that can be a little bit terrifying because you're like, oh my goodness, I worked with all these surgeons and now I need a peds letter. And I'll tell you a little bit more about rotations that I would recommend in a minute, but if you have 0 peds letters, that's potentially an issue, but you don't necessarily need to have all peds letters. So that's my 2 cents. And give your letter writers plenty of time, and then don't be afraid to gently nudge them if they're not getting them done. So the MSPE, you may recall from the NRMP data that everyone thought that the MSPE was really important. And the MSPE is really important. And so most schools will give you sort of the control or some input into the strengths section of the MSPE. And so use that to really highlight if I think in most cases, I think here they are given a draft and then the students are allowed to amend or add things if they feel like adding them. And then the people who write the MSPEs will take that into account. But if you have control over what goes in your MSPE, exercise that control. And again, for international students where your schools may not understand the importance of the MSPE, it behooves you to make sure that they understand that the MSPE is really highly regarded. And I think as we, so many things are changing, programs are going to having a lot of their preclinical courses going to pass fail, and with the step 1 going to pass fail, there's going to be less and less objective data. And although the MSPE is really not objective, it is going to be something that continues to take on a lot of weight when people are looking at your application packet altogether. Your personal statement. So this is your moment to shine. We see hundreds of transcripts. We see hundreds of test scores. We see lots and lots of letters, but your personal statement is really your opportunity to shine and to explain why you add diversity, how you have overcome obstacles, and all of the things that make you a really terrific candidate. You can use it to explain deficiencies, and I'll talk about the interview in a minute, and I would say somewhere you should explain deficiencies. And you don't necessarily need to flog yourself and be like, oh, I failed step 1, or I had to retake this course, or I had to take time off. But address them, because at some point when if you've gotten to the interview process and they're trying to decide how to rank you, often it comes up in our rank committee like, oh, so they took 2 years off. Well, what was that about? And if no one who interviewed them and no one can find in the file why they took 2 years off, that can be concerning. So if you have deficiencies, explain what you learned from them and how it made you a stronger candidate or a more resilient candidate or something. Proofread and have other people proofread it. And give it to people who know you well, but also give it to someone who doesn't know you as well and say sort of like, would you want to talk to this person? And that can be really helpful. And I have a couple other comments about personal statements a little bit later, but that's a good start. As far as what rotations to do, it's important to have a strong inpatient pediatrics rotation. And some institutions have strong inpatient pediatrics rotations and some don't. If you feel like your program doesn't, or you hear from your advisor, or you hear from someone in your house dean or whatever that maybe you're inpatient, or you did it and you felt like it wasn't all that, try and do a ped sub-I elsewhere, and then try and get a letter from those people. Make sure that you are doing in this 4th year that you're doing a mix of rotations related to pediatrics, but also rotations that you might not see again. So, radiology, everybody's got a chest, so you can learn a lot about pediatrics, but I would hesitate from feeling like you need to do all pediatric subspecialty rotations in your, for your whole fourth year. The exception being if you have a subspecialty that you think you are interested in pursuing as a fellow, it can be helpful to at least dabble in that in your fourth year so that you have figured out a little bit more about whether or not that is what you want to do. Because most pediatric programs, you do not have a ton of elective time in your intern year, and then the time to apply for fellowship is fairly early in your second year. And so if you have no idea whether, pediatric cardiology is the thing that you want to do, but you think it might be, that would be something to consider. And then the other thing, and Tyler and I were just talking about this before we started, is a lot of med schools, because of distinction tracks and vacation schedules and various things, a lot of medical schools, the students are kind of checked out clinically, either in January or certainly by match day. And I would, maybe I say this as a former teacher, I would kind of resist against that. For starters, you're paying for it. And so you might as well reap the benefits of learning. I also think it's a little bit of a more daunting thing to, have your last clinical experience be in February and then to come in as an intern in July. And so I would encourage you to continue to take rotations in the spring, and everybody deserves a break. So you guys will have been grinding for a long time by then, and obviously deserve a break, and you want to start residency fresh, and maybe you're going to need to move and things like that. But I would encourage you to continue to try and learn things during the second half of fourth year. So research and other activities. If you have done work, and this is something, I have a couple slides later that I specifically asked some of my colleagues for information regarding DO students and international medical grads. And this was one thing that someone said, which was that some DO programs do not have a very deep research opportunities, but lots of opportunities to work with underrepresented populations and rural populations. So if you've done that, highlight that in your application and be prepared to talk about it. If you are, if you're sitting now and you're like, I don't have any projects, I don't have, it may be more trouble than it's worth to try and start a new project from scratch here in April, before applications go out in the fall. But if you have things that you're working on, by all means, try and put in that extra effort to get them published or get them presented or whatnot. And that being said, if there is something that tickles your fancy, don't resist the urge to get involved, because it won't go on your CV necessarily in time for ARS, because there are always things to talk about during your interview that you might not have put on your CV. So a couple words about applications and interviews. So a lot of people are already asking, do you think the interviews are going to be in person this year? Do you think they're going to be virtual? And the short answer is, I don't know. There is a residency recruitment action committee through the APPD, which is the Academy of Pediatric Program Directors, that is in the process of trying to sort that out. And what I think is true is the parts I know are true is it's going to be one or it's going to be the other, but it's probably not going to be both. And then the other, and I don't know that that's a problem. There are definitely reasons why in-person interviews are better than virtual, and there are some reasons why virtual are better than in-person. For the virtual interviews, they're cheaper, right? Because you don't have to fly anywhere. and put yourself up in a hotel and rent a car, do whatever. They are less taxing on your academic schedule. So if you're on a rotation, you know, you can just take a single day and interview somewhere rather than having to miss, you know, 3 or 4 days of a rotation to do that. And so I think that those are really helpful. In-person interviews are helpful because you do get a good sense of the program. Although in talking with residents who we have matched now during 2 virtual seasons, they felt like they got a pretty good sense of our program, despite the fact that we were virtual. One place where I think in-person would really be preferable is if you are an ethnic or racial minority or an underrepresented minority, and you are concerned about your comfort, your safety, the fit of a particular community or hospital to your needs, that's a place where it would be really helpful to be able to go to the city, go to the program. And this year we did not allow second looks because, again, we felt like that detracted from the equity of everyone being virtual because it just did. To knowing people is helpful. But I think that it was, if you have the capacity to check a place out, if those are concerns that you have, I think that it can be really helpful just to come to the community. And what we did, our answer was, we did not do anything formal in-house. You were not allowed to have a tour of the hospital. You were not allowed to come to morning report separately from your virtual interview day, but our chiefs were happy to meet people outside of the hospital and talk to them that way. That was sort of how we, because I can't stop people from coming to Tucson. And then the supplemental application through ARIS, that is something that is also still on the table. And I'm there, again, that committee, the recruitment committee is working on making some decisions regarding that. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it. In short, it would allow you before the interview process to signal to a small handful of programs that you were really interested in interviewing there. And we've not done it in pediatrics before, but the intention is it would allow a program, again, who is looking at 1,300 applications, it would allow them the opportunity to narrow it down a little and be like, oh, that individual used one of their 5 signals to tell me that they really wanted to interview here, which may mean that they really want to come here. And I think that the programs for which that will be most helpful are programs actually, frankly, like ours. We are in a not as huge a city as some, and so people, to know that someone really wanted to come to the Southwest might impact my my interest in interviewing them. So that's really all I'm going to say about that right now. So where are you going to apply? In the huge world of programs, you're thinking about, do I want to be a big fish in a small pond, or do I want to be a small fish in a big pond? And it's a very personal decision, and you know you. So do you think that you are someone who would thrive in a community with lots of people, even though you yourself might not be known to all of the people in that program? Or do you really want to be in a place where everybody's on a first name basis because there are only 7 residents per class or something like that? So thinking about that. Do you want to be in a community hospital, or do you want to be in an academic institution? Do you want to be in a program with lots of fellows or a program with no fellows? And there's a misconception that a program with no fellows means that people don't go into fellowship. And when I do my 30-second brag about our own program, I can tell you that that's not true. But because we have lots of subspecialties, even though we don't have very many fellowships here. So it's just a question of who do you want to be getting your education from? Do you want to be getting it from attendings, or do you want to be getting it from fellows? Do you want a strong research component? If you're an MD, PhD, and you are committed to doing research throughout residency and into your career, you might look at places that have strong research programs. If that's less important to you, then that might not be something you want to look at. And then regional ties are another thing. Residency is hard work. It's long hours. It's emotionally draining. You're with a bunch of people who may be lovely, but can be a lot. And so do you have ties to a particular region because you have family in that region, or you have other supports in that region? Also things to think about. Some interview tips, whether virtual or in person. Be yourself. Be prepared, like I said earlier, to explain deficiencies in your application, whether it's step failures or COMLEX failures or COMLEX scores or step scores that aren't as high as you would like them to be. If you took a leave of absence, if you had to repeat a course or repeat a year, be prepared to talk about those things. Be prepared with questions, and not questions that you already know the answers to. So, especially now that we've been doing virtual interviews for 2 years, most programs' websites are quite well developed. And so there is a lot of information already in those websites. So don't ask questions about low-hanging fruit, where you could just look on the website and know how many residents you have, or where the residents go after graduation, or things like that. And it's okay to ask the same question to everyone you talk to in a given program. I will sometimes, so I talk with every single applicant, and I'll sometimes get people who say, I ask everyone this, but da, 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 da. You don't have to tell me that. You can just ask me the question. You don't have to show your card that you only have 3 questions that you ask people, because right now in this moment, I don't know what you asked other people. So just ask the questions. Make sure that that you are prepared to talk about anything that's on your CV, whether it's activities you did or research you did, activities that you in that separate area about, like, I can't remember what it's called, extra activities or pastimes or extracurriculars or whatever. If you like a particular dance style and you like it enough to put it on there, be prepared to talk about it. And then ask the questions that are important to you. And this is a place where I think people sometimes get nervous. But I would argue, and I would encourage you and support you to ask the questions that the answers are important to you. So if it is important to you that you be in a culturally diverse area, ask. If you think it's important to you that you specifically want to be in a program with a lot or in an area where there are a lot of people of your particular race or ethnicity, or your particular gender identity, or your particular, whatever it is, if it's a question where the answer would matter to you, then ask the question. Because the last thing that you want, and the last thing that the program wants, frankly, is to have you end up somewhere that that isn't a good fit. In that way, although the match system makes it very impersonal, the interview day is a really personal thing. It's an opportunity for you to get to know us and for us to get to know you. And if it's important to you to know whether we have other LGBTQ residents in our program or in our institution, then ask that question. And if you get a horrible answer, and I hope that you don't, then you have learned something really important about that program. So ask the questions. And then the other piece about interview day is be polite to everyone. And I mean everyone. So the person who helps you make the appointment, the person who orients you in the beginning of the day, the person, if it is an in-person interview, the person who takes you from interview 1 to interview 2, be polite to everyone, because they may not remember if you were polite, but they will definitely remember if you were rude. So be polite. Your grandparents will be proud of you. So I asked a number of program directors and associate program directors from other parts of the country for their tips and tricks that they've wanted to share with you. So here are a couple of tips and tricks from the peanut gallery. So one is that when you are make sure you add the state. If you live domestically, make sure you add the state, not just the city, in your hometown, because if there are so many different ways that programs can filter your application. And excuse me, if you leave off your state name and they're looking for people, for instance, from the Southeast, they may miss you because there's a Philadelphia, Georgia, and there's a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it won't pick up either. So something like that. If you are a DO student, recommendations to take the USMLE, like I was saying before, there are some programs who only look at USMLE scores. And even if you're applying to a program that looks at both, if your USMLE scores are better than your COMLEX because you are having a better day or whatever, then that can only help you. Do an inpatient peds rotation. I already said that. And if you don't have one where you are, a good one where you are, go somewhere else. If you are going to require a visa, be familiar with the types of visas that are available at different programs. And I have more about that in a minute. So what one person suggested was if you're using something like Frida or you're using Doximity or any of those, filter for the kind of visa that you need. But then once you have done that, look specifically at the programs to see how many international medical grads they have in their program. Because a program might flag themselves as accepting visas, but then when you look at who their residents currently are, and you see, that there aren't any international medical graduates in the last 3 classes, and that is really telling about the chances that you have. And I know that a lot of international medical grads apply to a lot of programs, and so don't bother applying to a program that has never accepted an international medical grad. Just protect that money somewhere else. Do what you can to get US clinical or research experience and try and get letters of recommendation from those folk. If English is not your first language, make sure that your personal statement is reviewed by someone who is a native English speaker. Because one of the things that can come up when programs are considering international medical grads is this person going to be able to integrate into our American healthcare system or our system in our small community or our big city, wherever we are. And so having on first blush, looking, when they're looking at your application, trying to decide if they want to interview you, you want it to be easy to read. And consider using your personal statement and your CV to explain, I know that a lot of international medical grads have actually been practicing after medical school out in their communities, abroad, and explain those experiences and what they've taught you and what you hope to bring to the program in terms of diversity of ideas. Because diversity is more than just ethnicity and race. Diversity, at least in our program, we really want to see a diverse group of humans. Here are the nice folk who made suggestions to me. So if you're considering those programs, Nationwide, Memorial Health Willett Children's in Savannah, and Children's Medical Center of Akron, those are all people who felt strongly enough, in particular, about reaching out and giving me tips and tricks for DO and international medical grads. So consider those programs. So here's my 2 minutes of shameless promotion of our own program. So I am from the University of Arizona in Tucson, and we are a medium-sized 14 residents per class program. We also have a combined pediatrics emergency medicine program, which is a 5-year program, and they're part of our family too. We have an incredibly diverse patient population. We are, as I showed you in like my first or second slide, we're only about 45 minutes from the Mexico border. So we get a lot of folks coming up from Mexico and through Mexico, some of them just to get their routine care. Some of them are immigrating in this direction. And as a result, and we also have people who immigrate from all over the world. So there's a lot of opportunity for advocacy there. We also, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized Native tribes, and 2 of them, in fact, I'm currently sitting on land that previously belonged to the Tohono O'odham and the Paskayaki, and we are incredibly aware and grateful for that. And so if you are interested in working in Native populations, this can be a great place. We are a big, crazy family, and Tucson is an incredible place to live. So while you're doing this whole process, I want to encourage you to continue to exercise, continue to eat well, drink a lot of water, consider incorporating some mindfulness practices. And had I not talked so much, I was actually going to teach you one now, and I'm happy to teach you one at the end of questions if there are people who want to stick around for that. I have taught our 4th year medical students 2 or 3 mindfulness practices that you can use in between interviews, you can use on your way to interviews, you can use while you're working on your ARIS application and freaking out a little bit. And so I find them to be very helpful. And then with that, these are all pictures of Tucson. That is a saguaro cactus. If you've never seen one, they're huge and beautiful. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing